Hello again. Do you know that native English speakers rarely stop to think about the next sentence they're going to say? It's not because they know more grammar than everyone else. It's because they have a collection of short, familiar expressions that help them react instantly during a conversation. These expressions are so natural that most native speakers don't even realize they're using them.
And that's exactly where many English learners fall behind. You might understand almost everything another person says, yet when it's your turn to respond, your mind starts searching for the perfect words. While you're busy building a sentence, the conversation has already moved on. The problem isn't your English, it's that you're trying to create every response from scratch, instead of using the ready-made expressions that native speakers rely on every single day.
Think about your own conversations in English. How often do you reply with yes, okay, I think so, or maybe? There's nothing grammatically wrong with those responses, but native speakers usually make conversations sound warmer, smoother, and more engaging by choosing expressions that acknowledge ideas, introduce opinions, and keep the discussion moving naturally.
That's exactly what today's lesson is about. We're going to explore 10 everyday sentences that native speakers use constantly without even thinking about them. You'll discover what each expression really means, when it sounds natural, and how it fits into completely different real-life situations. By the end of this episode, you'll have practical responses that you can start using immediately. And here's something to pay attention to. The final expression on today's list is so common that once you understand its purpose, you'll begin hearing it almost everywhere.
So, let's begin with the first sentence that is, I see what you mean. Now, this sentence may look simple, but it's one of those expressions that instantly tells the other person, I'm listening, and I understand your point. That's exactly why native speakers use it so often. Unlike saying, I understand, this expression feels more personal because you're responding to someone's idea rather than simply confirming that you heard the words. It shows that you've taken a moment to consider what the other person is saying. You'll hear it in conversations between friends, colleagues, family members, neighbors, and even in professional meetings. One thing to remember is that you should use it after someone has explained a thought or opinion. If you say it before they've finished speaking, it can sound impatient rather than attentive.
I think now we should see how naturally this sentence fits into different situations. Imagine a colleague has spent a few minutes explaining why the team should change the timeline for a project. Instead of replying with a simple, okay, you could say, I see what you mean. Extending the deadline would give everyone enough time to check the final details. Your response shows that you've understood both the idea and the reason behind it. Now, picture a close friend telling you they've decided to take a short break from social media because it was becoming too distracting. Rather than saying, I understand, you respond, I see what you mean. It can be difficult to concentrate when your phone keeps demanding your attention. That sounds much more supportive and conversational. Here's one more example. A teacher explains a grammar rule that finally clears up something you've been struggling with. Instead of simply nodding, you say, I see what you mean. The rule is much easier to remember when I compare it with that example. In every situation, the expression helps the conversation feel warmer because you're acknowledging the person's point before adding your own thought.
You have presented very good examples on this sentence. Now let's move on to the next sentence, which is, that makes perfect sense. Although it sounds similar to I see what you mean, there's a subtle difference. I see what you mean tells the speaker that you've understood their point. That makes perfect sense goes one step further. It tells them that their reasoning is reasonable and completely logical. In other words, you're not just following the conversation, you're telling the other person that their reasoning is convincing. Native speakers use this expression whenever someone explains the reason behind a decision, solves a problem, or connects ideas clearly.
So let's consider how it sounds in everyday conversations. Suppose you're planning a weekend trip with a group of friends and someone suggests leaving early on Saturday morning to avoid heavy traffic. You could reply, "That makes perfect sense. We'll probably save a lot of time if we leave before the roads get busy." Now, imagine a neighbor explains that they've started parking on a different street because construction work has blocked their usual parking space. Instead of simply saying, "Okay," you respond, "That makes perfect sense. It would be frustrating to move your car every few hours." Or perhaps a parent tells a teenager why finishing homework before turning on the television helps them stay focused. The teenager replies, "That makes perfect sense. I'll probably finish everything faster if I don't get distracted first." Notice how the expression naturally shows that the explanation is both clear and convincing.
Understanding someone's message is an important part of every conversation, but sometimes you want to do more than understand or agree. Sometimes you want to recognize that the other person has made an especially thoughtful observation. That's where our next expression becomes incredibly useful. And that expression is, "That's a good point." At first glance, it may seem like another way of saying "I agree," but it actually serves a different purpose. When you say, "That's a good point," you're drawing attention to a specific idea that you think is interesting, helpful, or worth considering. In other words, you're complimenting the quality of the person's thinking rather than simply agreeing with their opinion. That's why you'll often hear this expression during discussions, meetings, or everyday conversations where people are exchanging ideas. It encourages the other person to continue speaking because it tells them that what they've contributed has genuine value.
Thanks, Max. Now allow me to show you what that sentence looks like in various situations. Imagine your family is deciding where to spend the holidays. Everyone is suggesting different destinations until your sister says, "Maybe we should stay somewhere closer this year so we spend more time relaxing and less time traveling." Instead of immediately offering another suggestion, you could reply, "That's a good point. We'd enjoy the holiday much more if we weren't rushing from one airport to another." You're not just agreeing with her, you're recognizing that she's introduced an important idea. Next example is a business meeting. The team is discussing the launch of a new product when one colleague says, "Before we spend more money on advertising, we should collect feedback from our first customers." You respond, "That's a good point. Their feedback could help us improve the product before promoting it to a larger audience." Once again, you're acknowledging the value of the suggestion itself. Here's one more example. A group of friends is choosing a restaurant when someone reminds everyone that one friend has a food allergy. You could say, "That's a good point. Let's choose somewhere with plenty of suitable options." It's a small expression, but it tells people you're paying attention to ideas that matter.
I'm very impressed by your examples, Mia. Let's move on to the next sentence. "I couldn't agree more." This is one of the most natural ways to express complete agreement. Although the sentence contains the word couldn't, don't let that confuse you. You're actually saying that you've reached the highest possible level of agreement. You agree so completely that there's simply no room to agree anymore. Native speakers use this expression when someone has expressed exactly what they're thinking or feeling. It sounds sincere, confident, and enthusiastic without becoming exaggerated.
Shall we look at a few situations where it fits naturally?
Of course. How can we move on without your examples? Please share a few situations where you have used this expression before so we can analyze them together.
Okay, here is the first example. A friend says, "Looking after your health should always come before work because without good health, everything else becomes more difficult." You reply, "I couldn't agree more. Taking care of yourself makes it easier to succeed in every other part of life." Similarly, a second example that might help you use the sentence appropriately is when you're discussing education with a colleague who says, "Students learn much more by asking thoughtful questions than by memorizing information." You respond, "I couldn't agree more. Curiosity is one of the most valuable skills anyone can develop." Or perhaps your neighborhood is organizing a cleanup day, and someone says, if every resident helps for just 1 hour, the whole community will benefit. You smile and reply, I couldn't agree more. Small contributions from many people often create the biggest changes. By the way, if these expressions are already helping you think about English in a more natural way, take a moment to like this episode, subscribe to Native English Podcast, and share it with someone who's also working on becoming a more confident English speaker. Your support helps us continue creating practical lessons like this.
The next kind of response is a little different. Up to this point, we've looked at sentences that help you understand someone or agree with them. But real conversations aren't always that straightforward. Sometimes people ask questions that simply don't have one correct answer. In those moments, native speakers often say, it depends on the situation. This sentence is useful because it shows you're thinking carefully before giving an opinion. Instead of choosing one side immediately, you're recognizing that different situations can lead to different answers. Native speakers use it when the answer changes according to the circumstances, the people involved, or the context. It doesn't make you sound uncertain, quite the opposite. It shows that you're considering the whole picture instead of making a quick judgment. One helpful tip is not to stop after saying, it depends on the situation. Whenever possible, explain what it depends on. That makes your answer much more useful and much more natural.
Well explained, Max. Now it's my turn to share how we can use the sentence in different contexts. Imagine someone asks you, is working from home better than working in an office? Instead of choosing one answer immediately, you could say, it depends on the situation. If your job requires a lot of teamwork, working in the office might be better. But if you need long periods of concentration, working from home can be more productive. Your response sounds balanced because you've explained both possibilities. Another example context could be that two friends are discussing whether it's better to buy a house or continue renting. One of them asks for your opinion. You reply, it depends on the situation, your financial goals, where you want to live, and how long you plan to stay there all make a difference. Rather than giving a simple yes or no answer, you're helping them think about the bigger picture. Here's the last example on this sentence. A student asks a teacher, is it better to study in the morning or late at night? The teacher answers, it depends on the situation. Some people concentrate best early in the day, while others do their best work in the evening. Once again, the sentence creates a thoughtful response instead of an absolute one. One thing you'll notice is that native speakers aren't afraid to admit that some questions deserve more than a simple answer, and sometimes they go one step further by admitting that the answer isn't available yet.
That's exactly when you'll hear another very common sentence, we'll have to wait and see. Native speakers use this sentence when the outcome of a situation is still unknown. Maybe a decision hasn't been made yet, an event hasn't happened, or there simply isn't enough information to make a prediction. Instead of guessing, they acknowledge that time will reveal the answer. It sounds patient, realistic, and conversational, which is why you'll hear it so often in everyday English. Notice that this sentence doesn't mean you're avoiding the question. It simply means that nobody knows the answer yet, so the best thing to do is wait until more information becomes available.
Here are a few situations, Max, where it fits perfectly. Suppose your friend has just applied for a new job and asks, do you think I'll get it? You could reply, we'll have to wait and see. You've prepared well, so now it's just a matter of hearing back from the company. You're being encouraging without pretending to know the result. Now picture a family discussing the weather before a weekend picnic. Someone asks, do you think it'll rain? Instead of making a prediction, another family member says, we'll have to wait and see. The forecast has been changing all week. That sounds much more natural than pretending to be certain. Here's one final example. Two football fans are talking before a championship match. One asks, who's going to win? The other smiles and says, we'll have to wait and see. Both teams have been playing really well this season. The response keeps the conversation realistic because the result is still unknown.
And that's another habit you'll notice in natural English. Native speakers don't always rush to give definite answers. When the situation is uncertain, they're perfectly comfortable saying so. But there's one final sentence that appears in conversations even more often than most learners realize. It isn't used to agree with someone or to express uncertainty. Instead, it helps people keep the conversation connected from beginning to end. That's the final sentence we'll explore next. And that sentence is, "You know what I mean?" At first, it sounds like a simple question, but native speakers usually don't use it because they're genuinely asking whether you understand every word they've said. More often, they use it to check that you're following the idea they're trying to express. It's a natural way of keeping the listener involved in the conversation. You'll hear this sentence in friendly conversations, workplace discussions, and even interviews. One thing to remember, though, is not to use it after every sentence. If you repeat it too often, it can become distracting. Native speakers usually say it only when they're explaining something a little more personal, more detailed, or slightly difficult to describe. Used occasionally, it helps create a stronger connection with the person you're speaking to.
Let's hear how it sounds in various contexts. Imagine you're describing a busy week to a friend. You say, "I've been answering emails, attending meetings, and traveling almost every day. By the time I get home, I don't even feel like turning on the television. You know what I mean?" You're inviting your friend to relate to the experience rather than asking for an explanation. Another situation could be a colleague explaining why they prefer to prepare for presentations well in advance. They say, "If I leave everything until the last minute, I spend the whole day worrying instead of focusing on the presentation itself. You know what I mean?" The sentence encourages the listener to connect with the feeling behind the words. The final example on this sentence is a university student who is talking about learning English. They say, "Sometimes I know exactly what I want to say, but I can't find the right words quickly enough. You know what I mean?" That's a situation many English learners can relate to, and the sentence naturally invites understanding and shared experience. One thing all of today's sentences have in common is that they help conversations feel more natural. None of them use difficult vocabulary, but together they make a huge difference in the way you respond to other people.
And that's something we'd really encourage you to pay attention to after today's lesson. Don't try to memorize these sentences as if they're part of a vocabulary list. Instead, start noticing them whenever you're watching films, listening to podcasts, following interviews, or simply hearing native speakers talk. The more often you recognize them in real conversations, the more naturally they'll become part of your own English.
You explained today's topic really well, Max. I think now we should give a simple challenge to our audience. Choose just one sentence from today's lesson and make a point of using it in a real conversation within the next 24 hours. You don't have to use all 7 at once. Start with the one that feels the most natural to you, and then gradually add the others as your confidence grows. And before we finish, we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments which sentence you're going to use first and which one you hear native speakers use most often. Reading your experiences always gives us great ideas for future episodes, and it helps other learners see how these sentences are used in everyday life.
If you found today's lesson useful, make sure you subscribe to Native English Podcast so you don't miss our future episodes. Every lesson is designed to help you build natural, confident English, one conversation at a time. Thanks for spending this time with us, and we'll see you in the next episode.